Assessment of psychological attributes. Assessing means evaluating something. Attributes means characteristics. Psychological attributes are the skill sets that defines the mental equilibrium of individuals associated with their social interactions, response time, thinking process, openness, etc. In the assessment of psychological attributes, it measures the psychological attributes of the individuals along with their evaluation. And for this assessment, multiple methods are used. Before going to the details, if you are new here, please remember to subscribe this channel. Do watch other videos in the channel. Share it with students and those who love learning psychology. Thank you. Psychological assessment. Let's see what is a psychological assessment. It refers to the process of evaluating a person's psychological functioning and well-being. This process often involves the use of standardized tests and other tools to measure various aspects of an individual's mental health, such as intelligence, personality, emotions, and behaviors. The psychological assessment can be conducted for a variety of reasons, including diagnosing mental health disorder, evaluating cognitive abilities, assessing personality traits, and providing treatment recommendations. And these assessments are often conducted by trained professionals like psychologists, psychiatrists, or clinical social worker. For example, consider a person is experiencing symptoms of depression or feelings of sadness, low energy, and loss of interest in activities. They visit a mental health professional who decides to conduct a psychological assessment. For what? To understand the person's mental health and determine an appropriate treatment plan. So that is a psychological assessment. In general, the assessment is classified as formal assessment and informal assessment. Formal assessment is the method that use organized, objective, and standardized assessment techniques. Informal assessment, this varies from case to case and from assessor to another, and hence it is open to subjective interpretation. So that is formal and informal assessment. Now let's see the principles of psychological assessment. It includes, first one, holistic. The assessment should consider the whole person, taking into account their cognitive, emotional, and behavioral functioning, as well as their social and cultural context. For example, a comprehensive neuropsychological assessment that evaluates a person's cognitive, emotional, behavioral functioning and their medical history, medications, and social support network. Next principle is it should be ongoing. The assessment should be an ongoing process with ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the individual's progress over the time. For example, a therapist conducting regular progress evaluations with a client during therapy sessions to track their mental health and well-being. Next is the psychological assessment should be balanced. The assessment should use a balanced approach, incorporating multiple sources of information, including self-report, observation, and objective measures. For example, a therapist using a combination of interview, behavioral observation, and standardized psychological tests to assess a client's depression symptoms. Next is the assessment should be accurate. The assessment should be accurate, providing a valid and reliable picture of the individual's mental health and functioning. For example, a psychologist using a standardized intelligence test to accurately measure a person's cognitive abilities. Then the assessment should be confidential. It should maintain confidentiality and respect the individual's privacy, following ethical guidelines for informed consent and confidentiality. For example, a therapist maintaining confidentiality about a client's personal information and mental health status unless there is a legal or ethical obligation to disclose the information. These principles are essential for conducting ethical, effective, and reliable psychological assessments. Now let's see what are the psychological attributes we need to assess, right? For the psychological assessment, we assess the psychological attributes. And what are those attributes? The psychological characteristic or the attributes are not one-dimensional or linear. They are multi-dimensional. If you want to get a whole picture of a person, you will need to look at how they perform in several domains or areas such as cognitive, emotional, social, etc. First characteristic is intelligence. It refers to an individual's ability to learn, reason, and solving problem. An individual's ability to learn, reason, and problem solve can manifest in their academic or work performance as well as in their ability to adapt to new situations and solve everyday problems. Interest. It refers to an individual's preference for certain activities or topics. Interest can influence their choice of hobbies, leisure, and career path. Aptitude. It refers to an individual's potential to acquire certain skills or knowledge. Aptitude can be reflected in the ability to excel in certain areas such as athletics, music, or mathematics. Personality refers to an individual's characteristic pattern of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. An individual's personality can impact their relationship, communication style, and overall well-being. For example, someone who is extroverted may enjoy socializing and meeting new people, while someone who is introverted may prefer quiet activities and introspection. Values. It refers to an individual's beliefs and attitudes about what is important in life. An individual's values can shape their goals, decision making, and world view. For example, someone who values honesty may prioritize telling the truth even in difficult situations, while someone who values achievement may strive to reach ambitious career goals. So these are certain psychological attributes. Now let's see various assessment methods. First one, psychological test. Psychological test is a standardized and objective measure of an individual's behavior, abilities, personality, or other psychological attributes. The psychological tests are designed to be administered and scored according to specific procedure, ensuring that the results are reliable and valid. These tests are often used in psychological assessment to gather information about an individual's cognitive, emotional, behavioral functioning and to diagnose and treat various mental health conditions. The psychological test can take many forms like questionnaire, interview, performance-based task, etc. And these tests are used in a variety of settings like clinical practice, education, and research. Now let's see few examples of psychological test. First one is intelligence test. It assesses cognitive ability such as problem solving, reasoning, and memory. One such example of the intelligence test is Stanford Binet Intelligence Scale. Second is personality test. It measures individuals' personality traits, characteristics, and pattern of behavior. An example is Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory or MMPI. Then neuropsychological test. It assesses cognitive and emotional functioning as well as the impact of brain damage or injury. Then achievement test. It measures an individual's knowledge and skill level in a particular area such as academic subjects, vocational training or professional certification. Example are Scholastic Assessment Test, SAT and the GRE, Graduate Record Examinations. Next is aptitude test. It assesses individuals' potential for acquiring specific skill or knowledge such as mechanical aptitude or verbal aptitude. Examples are differential aptitude test DAT and the Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery ASVAB. So these are certain examples of one of the assessment method, psychological test. The second assessment method is interview. It is a method of psychological assessment that involves a face-to-face or virtual conversation between an interviewer and an individual being assessed. The interviewer asks questions and observes the individual's verbal and non-verbal behavior in order to gather information about their thoughts, feelings, behavior, and experiences. The interviews can be structured, where the interviewer asks standardized set of questions, or the interviews can be unstructured. Here the interviewer asks open-ended questions and allows the conversation to flow more freely. The interviews can be used in a variety of settings, including clinical, educational, and research context. Now let's see an example of an interview used in a clinical context. A clinical psychologist might use a semi-structured diagnostic interview to gather information about a patient's symptoms and mental health history. The psychologist would ask a standardized set of questions such as, can you tell me about your current symptoms? And have you ever been diagnosed with a mental health condition before? The patient's response would be used to make a diagnosis and develop a treatment plan. The psychologist might also ask follow-up questions to clarify or elaborate on the patient's response. The interview would be recorded or documented in order to review and analyze the information gathered. Next assessment method is case study. A case study is a research method that involves an in-depth examination of a particular person, group, or situation. In the context of psychological assessment, case studies are used to gather detailed information about an individual's behavior, experiences, and mental health status. Case studies can be used in clinical, educational, or research settings. Now let's see an example of a case study used in clinical context. A clinical psychologist conducts a case study of a patient with depression. The psychologist would gather detailed information about the patient's symptoms, history, and experiences using a variety of methods such as interview, self-report questionnaire, and observation. The psychologist would analyze this information to identify patterns, themes, and possible causes of the depression of the patient. The psychologist might also explore the patient's strength, resources, and coping strategies in order to develop a holistic understanding of the patient's situation. And based on the information gathered, the psychologist would develop a treatment plan for the patient's specific needs and goals. The psychologist would regularly evaluate the patient's progress and adjust the treatment plan as needed based on the patient's response. And the case study is documented as well. Next assessment method is observation. It is a method of psychological assessment that involves systematically watching and recording an individual's behavior in a natural or controlled setting. Observation can be used to gather information about the individual's behavior, emotions, and interaction with others. Observation can be conducted in a variety of settings such as homes, schools, workplaces, and clinics. Let's see an example of observation used in clinical setting. A child psychologist might use observation to assess a child's behavior and social skills in a classroom setting. The psychologist would systematically watch the child's interaction with the peers and teachers, and they note the behaviors such as verbal communication, nonverbal communication, social skills, attention, and emotional regulation. The psychologist would also gather information from the child's teacher and parents forward to obtain a comprehensive understanding of the child's behavior across different contexts. Based on the information gathered from this observation, the psychologist identify the child's strength and weakness and develop a treatment plan. And this treatment plan might include interventions such as social skill training, behavioral therapy, or medication. The psychologist then regularly evaluate the child's progress and adjust the treatment plan based on the child's response. And the observation would be documented in order to review and analyze the information gathered. And this information is shared with healthcare professionals involved in the child's care. And the next assessment method is self-report. It is a method of psychological assessment that involves an individual reporting their own thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and experiences. Self-report measures are usually in the form of questionnaires or surveys that the individual completes themselves. Self-report measures can be used to gather information about the individual's mental health, personality, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. Let's see an example of self-report used in a research setting. A researcher might use a self-report questionnaire to assess college students' attitude towards social media use. The questionnaire would ask students to report their own attitude towards the social media use, such as how often they use social media, why they use social media, and how they perceive the effects of social media on their mental health and relationships. The questionnaire would also gather demographic information such as age, gender, and academic major. Based on the responses gathered, the researcher would analyze the data to identify the patterns and relationship between the variable of interest. Like, the researcher might find the female student use social media more frequently than the male students, or the students who report higher level of anxiety also report more negative effects of social media use on their mental health. The self-report questionnaire would be documented in order to review and analyze the information gathered and to share with other researchers interested in the topic. So these are several assessment methods. Now let's have a quick recap on what we have learned. In the topic assessment of psychological attributes, we have learned what is a psychological assessment and the various principles used in psychological assessment like holistic, ongoing, balanced, accurate, and confidential. Then various psychological attributes that are assessed like intelligence, interest, aptitude, personality, and value. Then various assessment method used in assessing the psychological attributes. Those were the psychological test, interview, case study, observation, and self-report. Hope you like this video. Please share and subscribe. Thank you and keep smiling.